Kia ora. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm going to open this hui with a karakia. Tukua te wairua kia rere ki ngā taumata. Hai arahi ai a tātou mahi. Me tā tātou whai e ngā tikanga ara tauma. Kia moa, kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai e ngaro. Kia pupuri, kia whakamoa, kia tina, huie, taikia. So I am Holly and I'm going to be facilitating this hui tonight. I have three amazing panelists here to talk about a better budget for Auckland and what that's all about. And then after that, we'll have a good chunk of time for questions and answers from our panelists. So, yeah, I'm Holly. I am actually part of the Better Budget group who's been working on putting this together. I am Pākehā. I have grown up in Tāmaki Makaurau. I lived here since 2019, but after returning from overseas, but grew up here well into my mid-20s. And I'm really, I work on policy, like public policy, and study public policy. I've just started my PhD. So that's what I get up to, but really passionate about organising and campaigning when it comes to social issues and public policy issues as well. So we're holding this meeting because, as we know, Auckland Council has proposed kind of sweeping cuts to arts, community, environmental, climate change activities and the proposed 2023-2024 budget. Submissions are now open. So a better budget for Auckland. We want people to know about alternatives, about different options to what has actually been outlined in the council's proposal. And we want people to know why we can't and really must not take some of the proposal suggestions as a given. In particular, we note that the fiscal crisis, including the way that the rate of and cost of debt is outlined in the proposal, and the way it's framed as impacting council and future long-term spending, it's overstated and mischaracterised in the public consultation documents. The Better Budget group, or Better Budget for Auckland, also want to note that rather than cutting down or cutting off services, we should be looking at ways to bring in new revenue. So obviously a variety of ways to do this. We think promoting tourism instead of cutting the tourism budget, increasing parking fees, things like this are one way of doing this. Our kind of third quite significant way to think about this as well, and why we need to talk more about it, is because the proposed cuts are really large in scale, and we think that the public needed more time to understand what's being put forward and what it is our council is voting on. And in particular, we think that major decisions like this really should be delayed until the long plan term is revisited next year. But this is where we're at. We've been given a month, and now it's 10 or 11 days until submissions close. So this rush seems really it's putting a lot of people under pressure in terms of how long they've got to understand actually what the council's proposing and what they can submit back on. So following COVID-19 and the extreme recent weather events, we think cutting services and spending, it represents a backward step for Auckland, and one that we need to apparently fight for in order to halt. So it's to invest in the city, not to hurt it, of course, and a better budget, we think, is possible. It's what we're here tonight to talk about. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. We've got Craig Renney here. Craig is an economist and a director of policy at the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. Craig has worked as the Minister of Finance Senior Economic Advisor, as well as worked at the Reserve Bank, Treasury and the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment. And Craig's passionate about building an economy and a labour market that's not only productive but sustainable and inclusive. Tēnā koe. Craig, I'm going to introduce all our panelists and then I'll hand over to you. So we've also got Cissie Rock here. Cissy's worked in organising and with community groups for many, many years, served as president of the Auckland Pride Board. Cissy currently runs Community Think, working to help communities and organisations build on their kaupapa objectives successfully by providing them with resources like workshops, consultations, other development tools. And Cissy's committed to community development processes, combining systematic thinking with grassroots doing and finding ways for all to have a voice. Tēnā koe, Cissy. We also have India Logan-Riley here. India has studied archaeology and Māori history. India has attended the UN climate talks as a member of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus and is a founder of Te Ara Whatu, a group of Māori and Pacifica working for climate justice and Indigenous sovereignty. In 2021, India also addressed the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, where they asked world leaders to honour Indigenous knowledge and get in line or get out of the way. Kia ora, Craig, I'm going to hand over to you now to speak about what it is about the proposed Auckland Council budget that you think, alternatives that you think need to be spoken to here.
Good, Holly. Thank you, and hello, everyone. As Holly said, my name is Craig Renney, and I'm the CTU economist and director of policy. And thank you very much for coming tonight and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. I'll try not to take up too much of your time. For those of you who know me, budgets are my passion. I could spend the next 4 hours talking about budgets, and this is a particularly important one. So for us, I think we need to be, we need to look really closely at. I've helped pull together for the Minister of Finance 3 budgets, and budgets are all about choices. There's always a choice at a budget. Whenever you see a budget that says there is no alternative, that is a choice. It is a choice to say there is no alternative. It is similarly a choice to say there are other alternatives. And so there is a choice in front of us. It's not the choice that the Mayor wants us to see. There are plenty of other choices that could be taken, and we should be exploring all of them. Budgets are also about where you choose things. They're about where you show your values as a person, as a political organization, as an entity. And that's what this budget does. It shows the values of the Mayor. It shows the values of the things that the Mayor and his team care about and the things that they care a little bit less about. So the budget makes plain that, there are values, and there's no value in citizens' advice bureaus in Auckland. That there's no value in ECE centres provided for some of the poorest communities in Auckland. That there's no value in public transport services, which are cut through this budget. But there is a choice in, and clearly for the council, some value in not addressing climate change by freezing a rate which is designed to target and support climate change activity. And that's the choice that's in front of us as a council, as Aucklanders. I'm a Wellingtonian, but as Aucklanders, is that the values that are on display here demonstrate actually choices have been made, and there are alternatives to those choices. One of those choices is about, as Holly said, the debt that's in front of us. Auckland is nowhere near its debt ceiling. Auckland is many millions of dollars away from its debt ceiling. And in fact, just last week, Standard & Poor's, the credit rating agency, gave a glowing report about Auckland's debt facility, about its current debt handling, and said that in future it may improve the credit rating of Auckland because of its current debt levels. That's great, but it doesn't mean there's a debt crisis for Auckland. And it certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using debt to manage temporary cash flow issues. If we genuinely believe that the issues that are in front of Auckland are temporary, as the Mayor does, caused by the cyclone rebuild, caused by COVID, then it makes perfect sense to borrow some of that money to help address that short-term cash flow problem and to then address that in the long run and to protect the communities who are impacted by that. That's what the debt ceiling's for. We're nowhere near where that is now. We're nowhere near actually breaching any of those duties. And instead, we've chosen to not use that debt, or at least the Mayor has. And so that's a choice. It's a choice that's in front of us as Aucklanders, and it's a choice we should make a fully confirmed and fully thought through issue about. Because if we look at the interest rates, and one of the things the Mayor talks about in his campaigns is the threat of rising interest rates causing costs to rise as a council. The majority of the council's debt is fixed interest rates. Interest rate movements don't actually impact the council debt. And if we look globally at interest rates, we can see that we're almost at the peak of the interest rate cycle. In fact, anybody today who had a look at the GDP figures for New Zealand will think that interest rates are deeply unlikely to peak at where the Reserve Bank has them right now, and may well have peaked in terms of the tightening cycle. So what does that mean for Auckland? It means that interest rates aren't likely to increase at the rates that they will otherwise have been, that US interest rates aren't increasing at the rates that they are, UK interest rates aren't increasing at the rate that they are. There's no reason to think that the assumptions that underpin the Mayor's plan are the assumptions that will actually event in the real world. And in fact, one of the things that we should be looking at is the extent to which there is an upside to interest rates right now, and what space that gives us to protect those things. So we also know from the figures 2 days ago that tourism numbers are up across New Zealand, which is great. We've got more people coming to the country. Tourism's picking up more quickly than we had forecast even 6 months ago. Wonderful. But that also means that the revenue that comes into the council from those tourists, the revenue that comes in through tourist services, that comes in through council services, is likely to be more quick. It's likely to rise faster than perhaps the Mayor's forecasts had provided. What does that mean? It means there's more money in the council's coffers. Now, that's great, but if you've cut services and you've got more money, that just means you've got dead money, which could have protected those services. Instead, you should be using those forecasts, and you should be using the expectation of rising revenue to help support the communities that we know need to be supported right now, and are actually support the communities that have been really hurt from the cyclone, from the flooding events in Auckland before the cyclone, and from COVID. So we should know that we should be moving more quickly to support those services because there is revenue there to support them. Now, the council will say that it's done a really thorough job, a really difficult job of doing a full analysis of all of the options that are in front of us, and no doubt they will have done a financial analysis of some sort to help produce the plan that's in front of us. But if we look at what's there, look closely at what's being measured and what's not being measured, because that tells you what gets measured is important and what doesn't get measured is not important. What gets measured is debt. What gets measured is revenue. What doesn't get measured is the consequences of cutting services. What doesn't get measured are the services lost to communities and the impact of the reduction of those services on those communities. We measure the debt, but we don't measure the liability, the consequences of the reductions in those services. Many of those services, once we cut them, will be impossible to get back. They will be impossible to bring back at the rate that they are, or the costs of reopening them would be completely prohibitive. So when we make that decision, we're making a final decision for many of those services. And we should think very hard before we make that final decision, because not only are we robbing communities who need those services today, we're robbing communities in the future and many Aucklanders in the future of access to those services. So we should really think very hard about that, because essentially we're measuring the cost of everything, but the value of nothing in that space. And so a true cost benefit analysis for the council in this space would demonstrate to Aucklanders not only the financial consequences of those changes, but the financial consequences of on communities of what the cuts to services would mean and who would bear those costs. Because it's important to not only think about the costs, but it's important to think about who bears the costs. In economics, we use this pretentious term. We call it a distributional analysis, so we economists can afford our fancy suits. All it simply means is who wears the costs and who wears the benefits. Now, if the council cuts a service, it gets the benefit of no longer having to pay for it. But the people who bear the costs in Auckland are increasingly those who are some of the most marginalised communities already in Auckland, some of the poorest communities in Auckland. And they're the ones disproportionately who will bear the costs of these services and the costs of cuts to the provisions of these services. And if we look at the geographical distribution of those services, where will those services be cut? Will they be cut in Ponsonby? Will they be cut in Epsom? No, they'll be cut in areas we know that are already underserved, where communities already have huge levels of need, and there'll be real challenges in delivering on those services. And finally, I wouldn't be here from the CTU if we didn't look at the employment consequences of those cuts. And we didn't look at the employment consequences of who will lose their jobs and what plan the council has to support workers if it wants to cut those jobs. There's nothing in the budget, there's nothing I can see in the budget to support workers when they lose their jobs through council change. There's nothing to deliver a just transition for the communities that are impacted by those changes. So again, we're measuring the wrong things. We're measuring the debt where there is no debt crisis, but we're not measuring the value where we should be measuring the consequences on communities. So we find ourselves in a strange universe where we are in a universe where golf courses are more important because they hold water than libraries are in communities. We find ourselves in a universe where the ability to hit a ball, small hard ball, around 9 holes of golf is suddenly more important than arts and cultural services across a council area. If we were genuinely keen to explore what the actual costs and values of things were, we bring golf courses into those things. But apparently, according to the mayor this morning, they serve a valuable role as a means of holding water across Auckland. Well, great, but we kind of need things before then. We can't just continue with the many golf courses that we have, with the many other services that we have, with protecting tax lines for budgets for council services for businesses, but at the same time reducing community services across Auckland. So let me just finish by saying this. The mayor has every right to propose a budget. He absolutely does. He was elected, he has a popular mandate, he can do that. But he does not have the right to impose a budget. That's a different thing. And so we should be examining very carefully every possible line of expenditure and every possible line of possible revenue to the council. If we don't do that, we're not doing a good enough job for Aucklanders. And actually, that's the most important thing that we can be doing now. The mayor has the right through the process to propose selling the shares in the airport. That is absolutely his right. An asset that year after year in the period before COVID brought in a dividend for Auckland. Every year it brought in a dividend for Auckland. COVID stopped that. If we believe COVID is temporary, and if we believe, as the figures suggest, that tourists are returning to Auckland and to New Zealand, then that dividend will return. If we sell them, we will be temporarily better off, but we will be permanently poorer in the future. And we will also be permanently less in control of our city. And we will have the ability not only to influence the actions of the airport in terms of climate change, in terms of public transport, in terms of leverage on lots of other things that we do, we won't have the revenue from that dividend. And in fact, may well be that the costs of the borrowing over the long term, and long term here is 25 years, are actually less than the dividend value from the shares. So we would actually be poorer from selling the shares and not paying the interest on the borrowing on the other side. So the rest, sadly, is up to you as Aucklanders. A better budget is not only possible, there's always a choice. The choice that's being presented in front of us by the mayor. We've seen this game before. I come from a country. I came here in New Zealand 10 years ago, and from a country which was doing exactly this, which was choosing to cut services, which was choosing austerity as a means of delivering on its budget. And we can see the results in the UK today. We can see the results that's had across communities right across the UK. We can see the results it's had on local government, on schools and education systems. The country is permanently poorer as a consequence of its choice to choose austerity at that point in time. This is the first time in a while it's been brought to New Zealand, and we should resist it, because if we don't, we'll see it everywhere in New Zealand, as there is no alternative. There is an alternative to this program. There is an alternative to the austerity politics which are being put in front of us that place community services on the block whilst protecting businesses from rates that would otherwise have been charged. There is an alternative here, and a better choice is possible. Thank you all very much, and I'm really looking forward to all of your questions later on.
Kia ora, Craig. Thank you so much. That was really great to hear from you. And I really like the way, you're talking about this as a choice, and and that it is being framed in a very particular way to us when the consultation document is put forward. Really, really, really great analysis too. I'm going to throw over to Cissy and not talk too much myself. Seeing some questions are coming through, and just to remind everyone that we will be getting to questions after we've heard from our panelists who are talking to this idea of a better budget, and that there are other options and choices available, and talking from their perspective of the different communities that they interact with and work with. So we have here Cissie Rock. I'm going to mute myself. Kia ora, Cissy.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Thanks, Craig, for explaining that in a way that actually made it quite easy to digest. I guess I'm kind of here on behalf of all the people that I've had conversations with. I've lived, worked and played in Auckland for most of my life, and I've actually worked at Auckland Council as a community developer under many different labels. So I guess I kind of wanted to start with this big picture idea, and Craig did mention some of the events and activities and services that we wouldn't see that would be cut, like our CABs and library hours and art galleries, the zoo. There's regional grants that are around theatre and writers' festivals. There's all the stuff that happens with playground openings. There's and I think people can kind of get their head around some of that big picture stuff. We all like going to the library. The CABs probably help everyone once, if not twice, in their life. My dad came and said to me that he'd been to the art gallery with a friend, and I said to him, "Oh, how would you feel if that was reduced in hours?" But there are a whole lot of other things that happen as well, and I think any one of you can go and do this. I googled the local board minutes, and the kinds of events, the kinds of activities that are being sponsored are things like rape prevention, toy libraries, neighbourhood initiatives, basketball, self-defense course, blue light disco, an upcycling event, you know, the Avondale Community Action, you know, so there's all these tiny little things that are happening all throughout the Auckland region that really build social relationships, right? And this is one of the things that we're concerned about, you know, what happens when we don't have the places for people to meet each other, to form relationships, to contribute, to feel a sense of belonging. So while some of these activities that have been cut are actually recreational things that we enjoy, others are actually feeding the kind of social fabric of our community. And then I was kind of like thinking about what Craig was saying about the mayor has every right. And I think that this is an issue that first sort of got me really riled up, because democracy, you know, participation is an issue, right? Hardly anyone voted. So yes, the mayor has been voted in, but not by a whole lot of Aucklanders, because there's an issue with how we participate in democracy. This is the biggest issue that's facing us. How do we get people, you know, participating in democracy as it is now? And, you know, I think it's very interesting that there's just been this local government review, and it's talked about how we have to revitalise citizens-led participatory democracy, how, you know, local government needs to be a champion for well-being. So we've kind of got this review saying you need to be one thing, this budget saying another thing, and then the mayor going out on the back of really low participation, saying, because my understanding is, and I did reach out to quite a few councillors and I was pretty impressed with how quickly they came back to me, saying, look, I don't understand this. Why are you asking communities to do all the work? Why are you going out with a budget that you know is going to, you know, wreak havoc, and you're getting the communities to do the work? And, you know, what came back was, well, it's a convention that we support the mayor to go out with his budget and you know, consult with communities, and it's up to you, communities, and I think you said this, Craig, you know, to come back and follow the submission process. And I don't know whether I really agree with that. I just want to shout out to Joe Bartley, who said, I don't want that to happen. I'm going to vote no against that happening. But I also support people who are, there's good people and been elected as councillors, and you've been elected to kind of support us as the people of Auckland with our hopes and dreams. And, you know, I know you're out there and trying to encourage people to submit, and I can see that Auckland Council has a whole lot of different ways you can do this, but it's obviously not working, right? Because no one's voting. You know, I've just had hot off the press that as of midnight on Sunday the 11th, they had received 6,900 submissions on the annual budget. Now this is tracking as being twice as more than were received at the same point last year. And that Aucklanders 35 years or older were comparatively more represented among the submitters as compared to the 2018 census, all ages. And over 80% of the submitters gave their ethnicity or one of their ethnicities as European. So we're already getting a picture of who is following this process as it is laid out. And I guess that that's the thing that I'm really interested in here, is that what does good democracy look like? What does it look like to participate? This is what Craig's saying. I want to riff off that. What are our choices? And we know that what makes good, you know, participatory democratic processes is information. And that's one thing that we think is missing here. We haven't been given enough information, and it hasn't been given us to a way that we can understand it. Like, I work in this sector, and I went on to try and do a submission, and I gave up after about 2 different screens on my computer. I'm sure other people will too. So group deliberation is another really important ingredient, and that's what we're doing tonight. But there needs to be, and I think it needs to be driven by council, opportunities for group deliberation, and then we need time, and we've talked about that, that there's this really short amount of time. And so I think that the thing that concerns me is that we could be innovative. We could be bringing in a whole lot of different ways that people could have a say over Auckland and give people options and choices to generate and co-design. We could try things that have never been tried before. We could even ask people who weren't participating in some of our democratic processes what it is that would make a difference to them, right? Because that's the important thing is that people are getting to feel like they can shape and influence the things that they care about. And at the moment, we are having decisions that are going to be made, and I have heard from some of the other groups that have been meeting that, you know, the community is working so hard just to sustain themselves as it is. This is an added thing that they're having to do. They're tired, they're a little bit broken. They're actually thinking, what is it that we can say, or how do we work out what's going to happen if this does happen? That there are, you know, so that there isn't the resource in the broader sense of the word resource for people to be able to generate what's required to push back against this powerful, you know, institutionally backed process. And actually the very thing that I think, the very thing that would make a difference is all these social relationships. The very thing that is actually the answer to getting more people to participate, to feel as if people are making choices, is the very thing that we're taking away by this budget. And as Craig pointed out, this isn't just for now. This is looking at a 3-year cycle. And once it's gone, it's gone. You know, bringing it back in is going to be really hard. So I guess that, you know, I know that Wayne Brown came in on a fix Auckland, but, you know, is this really fixing Auckland? I don't think so. So I'll just stop there.
Kia ora. Thank you, Cissy, so much for your contribution there. And I like the way you emphasize at the heart of this, we're talking about democracy, and that there's some really flawed structures and systems in place that actually systematically working against people and the way they can have their voice in the place that they live in. So it's really, really big problem. And thank you for highlighting that and all the other contributions you were able to make there. Kia ora. I'm going to pass over to India now. And we've seen there's some good questions in the Q&A toolbox there. We will get to those after we've heard from India, and there'll be plenty of time. We will be trying to wrap up close to 7, but we've got some extra time if we need it and if people can stay. So thanks everyone. Kia ora, India.
Ai, kia ora koutou, ahuri hou no ngā tikangunu rongo mai wahine rangitane, ko India Logan-Riley hou. So as you can tell from my whakapapa, I'm from the East Coast, I'm from Hawke's Bay, but I actually have spent the majority of my life in Tāmaki Makaurau. So I was born here, and I lived here while my mum was studying. And we moved back to Hawke's Bay when I was a teenager, and then I came back for university, and I ended up staying in the city because I love the opportunities that are here and I love the communities that are here. And that sense of community, as Cissy talked about, is something that I've stayed in Tāmaki Makaurau for. And now I actually currently live in Otahu, South Auckland, also known as the Fashion District of South Auckland, if you're lucky enough to grace the shops here. And I want to point to a very lived reality in Otahu that speaks to budget cuts. During the COVID crisis, the town centre development, which needed an upgrade and hadn't happened for decades, was actually put on hold halfway through because there wasn't enough money. And so we've got half the town centre and half the streets walkable, with cycling areas, easy access areas. So if you're in a wheelchair, you're pushing a pram, it's more accessible. And then there's the other half of the town centre, which is much harder to navigate and more unsafe. And, you know, the drains clog easier and all of those kinds of things. And so we have, even here in Otahu, a lived reality of what budget cuts do. And we're also really lucky to live quite close to the library and the pool and the sports centre, and with the Citizens Advice Bureau sits, and I have myself used those facilities to just go and study, to use the internet, to go and get the forms that I need from CAB and that kind of thing. And so those are the kinds of services that I feel really lucky to have access to because I live in Tāmaki Makaurau and because investment has been put into maintaining those services. But what I'm here to talk to you about today, just briefly, because I do want us to get to question time with plenty of time for wānanga, is I'm a member of A Better Budget for Auckland, and have been a part of growing this little baby that we put out into the world a couple of days ago. And ultimately, it was a platform to prompt discussion and to really crack open that possibility, as Craig said, of choice, that we can choose better options for our people and for our communities. It isn't, perfect. It isn't 100%. We don't have all the financial documents that Auckland Council has, but from what we could find from the submission documents and the resources that were publicly accessible, we've created this alternative budget. And so we propose through that to cover the gap with an increase in borrowing. And we can do this. We can borrow really easily and come nowhere near the debt ceiling. And I do want to say that the debt ceiling is self-imposed. So council can change that if they want to. And in fact, economists have said that imposed debt ceiling is actually an idiotic level, and it could be much higher, and that would be financially sound as well. And of course, as Craig said, the credit rating agencies themselves have said, we're good. Like, the revenue streams coming in are good. The recovery of the city is going well, and they have not indicated any reason to panic or cut services in order to recover that gap. And of course, further on the document, if you want to see more of the details, you'll be able to see the other options that are on the table, looking at tourism and those kinds of things. And I do want to point out that in the Auckland Council proposed budget, they want to cut funding for services around tourism or community services that then generates revenue back. So it's again what Craig said of that thing of like, we're going to make ourselves poorer going into the future because we're going to cut the investment that helps generate revenue that then helps fund these important community binding services that Cissy has so eloquently talked about. And ultimately, what we want to really say with this budget is that there are options. There are options to go forward that doesn't mean we have to suffer and doesn't mean we have to punish ourselves and be cruel to other communities by cutting those services, but also that we need time to have this discussion. This is a major, major cut that is being proposed by Auckland Council and Wayne Brown. And we need to pause and reflect. And I know some of you in the questions have talked about, co-creation, going back to community. And that's what needs to happen. To make such big calls with a tiny window of just a month is unacceptable in terms of being in partnership and being in good relationship with community that elected these representatives. The local boards need to be funded to go out and have these conversations and those kinds of things. And I do also want to note that, the budget itself, the proposed budget came out in December. We're all on holiday. The time to pick through it, especially in our spare time, was slim. And so this does roll into the long-term plan and those kinds of things. And this isn't necessarily going to be an alternative budget that fixes everything, but it proposes ways that we can get some breathing room and put a line in the sand, an ideological line in the sand, and say, no, we're not going to cut these services for the sake of a mischaracterized crisis that doesn't actually exist. And austerity is not the answer. And we know from research and lived experience that austerity is not the answer. When communities are struggling, you keep investing into them rather than leaving them out in the rain and in the storms. You bring them in and we look after each other and we offer each other. And I think my final point that I want to make is, submissions are closing in 12 days on the 28th of March. There are quite a few submission guides out there that have been put out by various groups. Of course, we've got one on our website, so you can go and look at that, but there's a bunch of other platforms that we'll be sharing on our own social media to help you write your submission. And just gather your whānau, gather your friends and be like, let's just write a submission that says, you know what, this proposed budget is stink and we think there are better options and you need to go back to the drawing board and we want to keep our services. And it can be as simple as that. one sentence. And I really, really encourage you to do that because it can be effective. Of course, the work doesn't stop when submissions close, and we'll have more mahi to do to make sure our councillors are listening to what submissions have said. But that's the most important thing that we can do right now. And I do also know that Auckland Council is running community meetings where they will also take your submission that way. So if you don't feel like writing it, you can go to a community meeting and you can say it instead, and they'll note that down. So you can take your families to those. So really encourage you to go to those meetings as well. You'll be able to see them on the Auckland Council website. But yeah, happy to welcome questions. And ultimately, you know, this is a decision that's being made about the public purse, and that purse belongs to the public. So the public should be allowed to determine what happens to that purse and how we use that purse to make sure that Auckland is the thriving and healthy and safe city that it should be. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, India. Thank you for reminding us. Yeah, it's our purse, it's our budget, it's the place we live in, and that's kind of the bottom line, is that it's really not acceptable to kind of thrust this on people, and like Cissy said before as well, yeah, like the consultation process itself, highly problematic for yeah, putting all the work on communities. I want to say thank you to the panelists, but also that we do have questions, and we would like our panelists to be able to offer some perspectives on these. So I'm just going to work my way through the questions in the Q&A box, and we'll see how we go for time. But also I will just pop in. Oh, so someone, yeah, India just put the website up, which is what I was going to do. And to say that, so you can visit our the Better Budget Auckland website and see what we suggest as options, but also one set of alternatives that we put forward. And as India says, yeah, maybe it's there are so many options, and sitting down with your whānau and deciding, or your community members, and deciding what works for you and what doesn't is the most important part here. But apart from the other really important part, which is remembering that there are options, and that there were choices made when this consultation document was put forward. So in the Q&A I've got here, someone who works at council has said that the council group went through a huge round of staff layoffs post-COVID to plug $1 billion in council finances, and a number of staff are already stressed and overworked since those cuts. So generally, we have talked about, Craig touched on the impact of people being let go from the council, and that there's no support for these workers. But Craig, would you add any further comment on that aspect of what's being proposed here in terms of further cuts?
Sure, thank you, Holly. One of the things I'd say to the person who asks the question is actually what's really important is your insight. And your ability to demonstrate to the council the impact that those already staff cuts that have already taken place have had on the services and on the goods that the council provides, and on the capacity of the council to respond to the challenges that we've had in the past few months. Because we know those kinds of challenges are going to keep happening in Auckland, and we know that we're going to keep having challenges in communities, and so further staff cuts are likely not only to exacerbate the ability of the council to respond promptly and in time that what Aucklanders would like to see, it's likely to make the ability to get the goods and services in the future harder and harder and harder. And we all know how that works. It becomes harder and harder to do. People opt out, people get private provision of those goods and services, and the council just says it's not our responsibility. We don't want that to happen. So it's actually really important, if you're the worker there who's able to talk about that, to make that case to the council about the impact that the previous staff cuts have had, so that we can demonstrate that the staff cuts that will be taken through this round of cuts will have an even worse impact in the future.
Kia ora. Thank you, Craig. So I'm just working my way through the questions here, and there's another one that's directed at Craig. So maybe I will just follow up with this, which is when you were speaking, and cast doubt on the airport figures and the way that they've been presented. There was a question here about reliability of the other figures in the budgets and the totals. I guess, yeah, would you be able to speak to that further, or I can comment?
I'm sure, I mean, where I can. If you turn to page 12 of the budget document, for those of you who are desperately following along at home with a copy of the document in front of them, you'll see two charts, one of which is the inflation outlook and one of which is the official cash rate outlook. And you can see different lines where those rates have been revised in the past. And that's in part what the council is claiming has helped to drive the gap that exists in its budget. Those revisions happen because previous economists got it wrong. Economists like me will get it wrong in the future. We actually don't know. And so the extent to which we should be using these forecasts rather than previous forecasts or even newer forecasts where they exist, the real challenge here is that we don't really know the basis of what's driving much of what the council's finances are. And we don't really know what's driving much in terms of why the council has chosen service X or service Y to cut. We just know to make these decisions. And that's what we really need to interrogate as part of this process. And again, it's about measuring the cost of things and the value of things. So not only how much is a service likely to cost or get cut by, but what's the value of that good or that service, not only to the council, but to the community who currently receives it. And actually then working out the true cost benefit analysis of that, and whether or not actually borrowing some money to maintain that service would be a better use of council resources right now.
Kia ora, thank you. That was really comprehensive. Thank you. So I've got here another question, and this is about someone who wishes to submit something on behalf of some wahine Māori, and would like some perhaps guidance if any of our panelists can offer this on maybe some resources or ways of putting their submission together without putting the work back on the group of wahine Māori.
Yeah,
I mean,
think
there is a, oh, you go, India.
no, you go, Cissy.
I was just saying, there is a great website that's been set up that really breaks stuff down easily and guides you through the submission process. And I was just trying to have a look and see whether I could put the link in the chat, so I can do that, because I think that that's the thing that is helpful, right? Like listening to Craig or Evan. I had this idea that we could do submission dinner parties or afternoon teas, you know, like how do we make it fun so that people can sit down and you can actually understand the information. And, you know, I saw a couple of those comments about how daunting some of the processes are and how, you know, unappealing they are for people. And I've also got a list of have your say events that Auckland Council is having that people can go along and just talk to. And I was going to put that in the chat. I've just copy and paste it. So if it works out looking really weird, then we can do something different with it maybe. Yeah, I'll go and look those two things up.
Thank you, Cissy. That's amazing if you can. Did you have anything to add to that, India?
Yeah, I do just really want to emphasize, like, as a young person, when I first started getting involved in these types of processes, a lot of the work was put into just making it accessible and just making it like understandable. And even there are some parts of this budget where, you know, I myself have had to ask other members of our group, what does this mean? What is that? Because it's all very heavily leans into jargon as well. And so I think this is something to note, to be able to give as feedback to our councillors in future, because as Holly, or as was explained, it was, you know, this is a formality that the mayor puts together the budget and then it goes out there and then it gets consulted on. That there are better ways to do this, and actually this should be resourced. And we saw that from the local elections processes as well, that they're like really not accessible for people. And so we do need to take note of these learnings and then make sure to communicate that to people. And I'm sure there's always like a group of friends or a ragtag bunch of people who are willing to take a kaupapa forward and push for change around it. And so, yeah, it's not just the budget now, but it's an ongoing consideration, because we haven't ended up here by mistake, in these processes, and they can be changed.
Kia ora. Thank you, India. Yeah, and Cissy has placed in the chat there the Stop the Cuts URL or website that you can go to. They do have some really great resources that they've been sharing. And yeah, and thank you, India, on that, and accessibility as well. And it's true, like the more we do this and take note, and yeah, don't forget our learnings, the more, well, the less work perhaps it can be in future. Thank you for that, both of you. Yeah, there's quite a few comments, so I'm just trying to work my way through and see if I can turn them into questions. But and someone has asked, this is, I think, a really great question. What else can we do other than just submissions? What would we recommend? Perhaps India talked about the oral submissions, and yeah, there's a process taking place on Monday, people's oral submission. Do any of our panelists have any other suggestions or more detail on the oral submission side here?
Just to say from previous experience, you go in there and you sit down with these staff who have been hired to hear your kōrero, and you can share that. And I will just say on top of that, you can share this kaupapa on social media as well. And as Cissy talked about, I love the idea of submission dinner parties, because I love the idea of food. And then as well, of course, yeah, keep following our social, because there's pressure that will need to be maintained beyond the closing of the submission process. And so we can kind of flex our community power in different ways beyond this. Cissy, I notice you've unmuted.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it is important to remember that the submission process isn't binding, right? So it's really important, because let's say there isn't a lot of pushback, or it's 50-50, then people can say, oh, look, a lot of people were very happy with this budget. And when you look at the demographic of who is submitting, where we're not sure what those submissions are, but the squeaky wheel, like, you have to apply pressure. I've been in council, I know what it's like when you get lots of emails all the time from people. You want pressure, and there are really good people working in council. And I was going to add to what Craig was saying. I'll take this moment to do that. It's not just the staff losing their jobs, right? It's all that knowledge and institutional knowledge and networks and relationships that these people have built over so much time. They are often, these people, the doorway into council. They're the navigators, they're the translators, and they're the liberators of funds and resources. So when these teams are disestablished, or when people think, oh, it's just too much, I'm going to go and work somewhere else, all that, and I'll use this word in inverted commas, talent is lost for this, Auckland region. So I think, yeah, I'd just like be emailing, I'd be like bringing out puppets, I'd be doing interpretive dance, I'd turn up with lots and lots and lots of people, like there's 50 of them here, and I'd just, yeah, that's what I'd do. I'd have some fun while I was doing it.
Kia ora. Thank you, Cissy. And Indy, you've got something else to add?
Yeah, just saying, we've had added in the Q&A that on the 30th of March, the Community Coalition Against Cuts will be gathering at Auckland Town Hall during the council's decision-making meeting, and that everyone is welcome to come. So 30th of March, I'd definitely say get along to that as well. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, and that was the next question I was looking to, which is, any council debates regarding the budget or sitting days that we can pick it outside of. I think, yeah, solidarity is probably key here at the moment, since we've only got this kind of little over, well, these 10 days. So, oh, sorry, 30th of March. This is after the submissions close. Yeah, cool. Outside town hall. But there's also a, I would really suggest that if you follow us, we'll be sharing all people or kaupapa working on this at the moment. We'll share all of the events that they're having. So there's sorry, it's hard to do this as a facilitator, like get up your socials, but there's definitely there's a march or a protest on Friday run by a coalition as well. So yeah, Cissie Rock has put some in the chat now as well. Yeah, the collective response to Auckland Council budget, in-person hui. There's so many, but definitely keep an eye on our social media, and we're boosting, of course, other kaupapa who you can follow, and keep an eye on what they're doing as well. Excellent. So I guess there was a question about who designs the submission process, sorry, and if this can be challenged. So that's maybe, yeah, a bit of a more technical question, in my opinion, but would anyone comment on that? Any of our panelists have anything to comment on that? Yeah, so I mean, the consultation process, I personally don't know much about how it's designed, so I'm not going to give that a go, but we can certainly make a note of this and see what we can put up on our own platforms in the coming days. India?
Yeah, sorry. Just to quickly say on that, like, this is pretty formulaic. It's been done this way for a long time, and there's always been issues with it, particularly for younger people and people who are working, 2 jobs to pay rent and that kind of thing. So yeah, this is an ongoing situation around consultations that, yeah, you'll be given a small window of time. There'll be a bunch of documents that are a bit vague and quite leading. And it's the same with central government as well. And I know, coming from back home on the marae, that this isn't necessarily how we do decision making. And so, as well as the conversation about the budget, I think, yeah, as has been said in the questions, it does raise a really important question about how we do good decision making.
Kia ora. Thank you, India. Cool, just reading through the questions, sorry. We are about to hit 7 p.m, so I'll try and get a couple more questions out there. Really appreciate everyone for staying with us. And I'm aware that, yeah, people might have to move on to things, and I would like to be able to thank people formally for sharing their time with us and for coming to listen. But I will just try and squeeze in a couple more questions perhaps before the 5 past mark. So give me one moment. A lot of these questions are about actually putting in your submissions, and so I wonder if I can copy and paste these and put together a bit more of a guide myself, or with a Better Budget group. And here's I guess a bit more of a political question in a way. Someone's asking, what are the requirements for a consultation process to be truly democratic? Because is it that they're well presented, good questions and readable? I'd be interested to hear, yeah, if any of our panelists had a perspective on this. It probably crosses over with a lot of the things we've already talked about.
I think that there are lots of great websites that have examples of stuff that's been done overseas, because, it really depends on your worldview, doesn't it, about what truly participatory or truly democratic means. But I guess the point that I want to make is that if we want all people to be able to feel like they can participate, we've got to have many different ways for people to be able to contribute, and that will look different in different communities, and probably local communities know the best way to engage people. So I think, you know, Auckland Council's gone a long way. I'm trying to create like a document that can show you all these different places that you can have your say, but I feel like it's all done out of the same copybook. You know, it's the generating, you know, other ideas, but still within this one kind of worldview. And, you know, so I think we have to go right back to the systemic issue of, you know, what can we, you know, how do we revitalize citizen-led, you know, democracy? And it's a bigger thing, but I'm up for it. If anyone's up for it, I'm up for that.
I'm up for it too, Cissy. Thank you. Okay, this was a really excellent question, I thought. Sorry, Craig. Sorry.
Just to jump off that. What does it mean to be truly democratic? Well, the amount of money that's at stake here, according to the council's budget on page 21, is $6.2 billion. If we're spending $6.2 billion, we should probably spend it well, but we should probably spend a bit of time to make sure we're actually spending it well, and actually to go through it properly. And the amounts of money and the amounts of time that have been set aside for that conversation don't seem to truly fit alongside the idea of it being a truly democratic process. So to me, one of the things I want to see is us spending a little bit more time before we spend what essentially we spend on secondary education in New Zealand, and thinking about that very carefully, rather than trying to push that through inside a month.
Kia ora. Thank you for adding that on, Craig. Really, really helpful. This question regarding proposing an increase in rates for property owners, would this not increase hardship for those of us renting? I wonder if, so India, you would like to pounce on this. Thank you.
Yes, so back when Phil Goff was doing his climate action targeted rate, I raised this exact point and talked it over with some experts. And they said basically the research shows that landlords will put up the rent no matter what, rates or not. They will do their best to increase rents anyway. And so that requires kind of a different intervention. And the argument of rates increasing rent is a bit of like a red herring, because landlords will increase it anyway. And so that's another kaupapa we need to deal with. But I don't know, Craig, if you've got thoughts on that too.
Craig, you're on mute. If you were going to add, that would be awesome. Thanks.
I missed the question very much at the very beginning, so we should probably just leap ahead.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't catch.
I missed the question at the very beginning because of the fault on my line. So
oh no, all good. So regarding an increase in rates for property owners, would this not increase hardship for those of us renting?
As India had said, landlords have never been shy about leaving money on the table. If money is available and they're going to put it there, the rent is the highest the market will bear. The extent to which putting up rates is likely to do that is now. That's deeply unlikely to happen. What is likely to happen is that everyone's insurance will go up. Because we are not making the investments that we need in drainage and storm clearance and storm waters and other things, which actually costs landlords and everybody more money, that we're not making the investments in public transport and the things that allow people to get to work, and in other services. So there's plenty of things that will affect people and make their lives harder, which are actually a consequence of not investing, not just about the things where we choose just to try and put a bit of money in the hope that a little bit of short-term gain and we'll put off some long-term pain. In fact, we're actually buying the problem more expensively in the future often.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's really important to remember that, yeah, this is, it's about, it's not going to fall on renters, and we all have to invest in this as well. But Kia ora. I do want to kind of wrap things up. There's a lot of comments in the Q&A, and some of these I can formulate into questions, but with time in mind, I think that it's best that we wrap it up here and on this note. And thank you everyone for coming and for sharing all the kaupapa links, which I've tried to just make sure they're copied over into, oh, I'm sorry, there was a hand raised and I did not see that, sorry. So I'm sorry, Terry, and I'm not sure if you're actually still there or if you had to go. Yeah, if you had a question, please do not hesitate to reach out to us on our social media or on our website for us to follow up on there. Kia ora. Okay, I'm going to just thank everyone here. Thank Craig, India, Cissy in particular, for offering your time and the various perspectives that you've been able to bring tonight. Really appreciated all the clarity that you've kind of brought to some of the different complexities of this problem, and it is complex, but just remembering that, yeah, what the Better Budget group has put together is really to emphasize that there are options and that we can't just let the council tell us that there's one way to do this, and yeah, we just need to be able to work together now to get on top of these submissions, as flawed as the process is, and work in solidarity, as a lot of people have commented in the Q&A as well, where we can collaboratively and be in the same room where we can as well. Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to close us with a karakia and hope to talk to you or see you in person or online very soon. Kia whakakai ria te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara. Kia turiki whakatahi ai, kia turiki whakatahi ai. Haumie huie taikia. Thank you, everyone. And this recording will probably be available on our website, but otherwise, yeah, keep an eye out on our social media for ways that we can respond to the other questions and ideas that were presented here. Kia ora. Thank you.